By the way, there's a terrific book out there, Known and Unknown, New York Times bestseller, a memoir by somebody I admire enormously, former Secretary of Defense and former a lot of things, Donald Rumsfeld. How are you, sir?
Terrific. How are you, Mark?
I'm very well. Listen, I couldn't think of anybody better to talk to you than you because I am completely confounded here. I have no idea what the president is doing with Libya. Do you? I mean, honestly, do you know what's going on here?
Well, no. I think the first thing I would say is we have U.S. military people at risk, and needless to say, we all want whatever is done to succeed and for it to be well done and well managed. The problem we've got is, in my book, I talk about the importance of having the mission determine the coalition. In other words, deciding with clarity and precision what your mission is, and then getting people to assist you. It looks to me like it's kind of backwards here. We fashioned a coalition, but the mission lacks clarity. It lacks clarity within the administration, and it lacks clarity within the coalition, which is a dangerous situation.
What kind of message does that send allies and enemies alike?
Well, it certainly sends a message of ambivalence. And if you put yourself in the shoes of people who are part of the Gaddafi regime, they do not know whether the mission is to remove Gaddafi or not. Some say it is, some say it isn't. And as long as there's that ambiguity, they're going to have to make a judgment. Think of the ambassadors that have defected. Think of the military people who 2, 3, 4 weeks ago thought that Gaddafi would be done. They then jumped ship and said that they would oppose Gaddafi. Military people did. And then, of course, there was this long delay, and then the rebels were crushed. And anyone who was asked to assist the rebels has to be very careful. Because they don't know what ultimately is going to happen. They don't know what the coalition's decision is. Another thing that concerns me, to go to your first question, is there is confusion and lack of clarity about the command and control. And needless to say, that is also dangerous. If different people have different rules of engagement, different people have different missions, no one knows who's ultimately going to lead the coalition or what its purpose is. That is clearly a worrisome thing.
Well, I think the French and the Brits are very worried about it. They're talking about forming some committee. I mean, they see a gap in leadership here. They also hear Obama saying it's going to be a few days, and yet, you know, we want regime change, but we don't want regime change. Honestly, I think I'm halfway intelligent. I've been trying to keep track of this. If we can't figure out what the hell's going on, how's Gaddafi going to know? We want him to respond in ways that we want him to respond to our actions. And as you just pointed out, well, if we're not clear why we're doing what we're doing, how the hell is he going to be clear?
And exactly. If you think back, I mean, it is possible to have a coalition work. George W. Bush, who was constantly labeled a unilateralist by people like John Kerry, of course, put together a 90-nation coalition on the global war on terror, put together a 98 or 6-nation coalition on the Coalition Proliferation Initiative to try to prevent the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. There were a couple of dozen, 3 dozen in some cases, coalition members in Afghanistan and Iraq. So, but the one thing we know is you don't lead a war, run a war by committee. You have to come to agreement as to what the mission is, and then you have to come to agreement as what the command and control is. And to the extent someone's uncomfortable with that later, then they leave, and that's fine. One of the terribly dangerous things about a ambiguity in this case, go back to the first Gulf War. When it was over, Saddam Hussein said, basically, that he fought the mother of all battles, and he was still in office, and George Herbert Walker Bush was out, and Margaret Thatcher was out. And he was still there. So he was emboldened by it. And I don't question for a minute right now, but that the confusion emboldens Gaddafi and makes everything that the folks are trying to do more difficult.
And if he's left standing, he's going to be really emboldened. That's your point.
Indeed.
Well, I'm trying to figure out, honestly, what triggered Obama to get involved. In other words, if we can't figure out, really 2 weeks later after they started to obviously make plans of some kind, if we can't figure out today what exactly, after his multiple comments and the Secretary of State's comments and so forth, if we can't figure that out, I'm saying, well, what is it what were they talking about? What were they trying to come up with?
I'll give you another concern, at least the one that concerns me. If you look at that part of the world, Egypt's got, 85 million people? Saudi Arabia and the Gulf probably have 25, 30, 35 million people. They are the anchors in the region from the standpoint of the strategic interests of the United States of America. It's not Libya with 6 million. It's not Tunisia. It's not Yemen, even Yemen with 23 million. And everything we do with respect to those other countries, Libya, Tunisia, even Yemen, is looked at in Egypt and looked at in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. And the outcomes in Egypt and Saudi Arabia and the Gulf are of enormous importance from a strategic standpoint for the United States, for the region, for Israel, and for Western Europe in terms of the oil implications. And I don't get any impression that people are testing their comments and their behavior against what are the potential implications in Egypt and in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. And I think it's important that they do so.
And as for Egypt, we don't really pay any attention to it anymore, and yet that matter has not been resolved, and it can be resolved very badly for us, couldn't it?
Well, it is being resolved badly. And once you decide you're going to have early elections as opposed to a decent interval, that means that the most organized and disciplined entities, organizations, political parties, if you will, are going to have an enormous advantage. The ones that aren't organized, the popular uprising that we saw, they're not organized. They don't have political parties. Now, who's organized? The Muslim Brotherhood's organized. It's disciplined. It's a very small minority of the country, but it's vicious and perfectly willing to use the hammer. That means that the earlier the election, the greater the advantage for the Muslim Brotherhood. Go back to Lebanon and think of there was a popular uprising, and we were all excited about the Cedar Revolution and the hope that the people would be able to create and fashion and conduct a democratic society, civil society. And who's running it? Hezbollah's running it, a terrorist organization. Look at the encouragement people had with the revolution in Iran, and now who's running it? A handful of Ayatollahs. So you can't help but just feel great sorrow when you look around the world and see the countries that don't have free political systems and don't have free economic systems, because it's only with free political and economic systems where people have the kinds of opportunities we do in this country. And they have repressive systems and command economies. And people are poor and unemployed, and they want better than that. But they rise up and don't get better than that in many cases, because the tougher, more disciplined, better organized, and more extreme, in this case, in the case of Hezbollah, radical Islamists.
Now, for most of you, this voice is familiar. Not mine, his I'm talking about. Donald Rumsfeld. Great man, I've admired for a very, very long time from afar. Has a great book out, New York Times bestseller, Known and Unknown, and memoir. Quickly, sir, I'm not into this quote-unquote democracy project. I cannot even fully explain it. It hasn't been well explained by its proponent. I'm into whatever works for American national security, and I pointed out before he came on, with Ronald Reagan, we could promote democracy in certain countries, we would, but if we had allies that were standing up against the communists, just as today, where we have allies that are standing up against the Islamists, we have to embrace those allies. You know, we can't remake the entire world the way we would like it to be.
I certainly agree with what you've just said. I've always preferred the word freedom to democracy, because when you use the word democracy, I'm a Democrat, I believe in democracy, but it suggests to the world that we think we could impose our system, our democratic system, on other countries. And I'm a great believer that culture matters, neighbors matter, history matters, the timing matters. I mean, think of our country. Our democracies evolved over a history of our country. We had slaves for years into the 1800s. Women didn't vote into the 1900s. Had a terrible civil war. It isn't easy to get from where we were to where we are, and it won't be easy for other countries. And you're quite right. You've got to balance your security interests, your strategic interests, and one other thing you have to add. And we have to have a healthy respect for things we're not capable of doing. I don't believe we're capable of building other countries. I think the people in those countries have to build themselves. We can encourage it. We know that people are better off if they have free countries. That's clear. Just look down from outer space on Earth, and that's a fact. It's just a reality. But we have to respect the fact that there are things we can't do.
You are terrific. You're terrific, not only because I agree with you, by the way. You're terrific. No, but you don't mess around. You tell her, you've been around long enough. You don't play games. You're not running for office. You give an opinion. It's well thought out, even if people disagree with you. So it really is a pleasure to talk to you. And I want to thank you for coming on the program again. The book, by the way, New York Times bestseller, Known and Unknown, a memoir. And I want everybody to know all the proceeds go to the wounded and the families of the fallen. And you're a great patriot, sir. God bless you, my friend.
Mark, thank you so much. I'll come on anytime I can be helpful.
Well, you are. You're big helpful. All right. You take care.
Thanks so much. Goodbye.
All right. Wasn't that great? See, don't pay attention to what the left tries to do to create impressions, to caricature people. You just heard that man speak. Absolute common sense and fidelity to principle. And he's been through it. So it was a pleasure to have him. It really was. And he came on at the last minute, so I appreciate that too.